Good evening, and welcome to tonight's Bruin Family Insights virtual discussion. Our discussion is brought to you by the UCLA Parent and Family Programs. And throughout this academic year, we're engaging in conversations about topics that are important to our families and our students. And we're learning about resources available to us at UCLA. My name is Dan Lowe, and my older son Christopher just graduated in June with a degree in economics. Our younger son, Jonathan, is a third-year mechanical engineering student. And my wife and I have the honor and privilege of serving as the co-chairs-elect of the UCLA Parents Council. Tonight's topic is entitled, Addressing Mental Health and Holistic Wellness with Your Student. Our goal tonight is to understand how the pressures of college influence our students' mental and emotional health, and to learn about the campus resources available to us at UCLA to help our students develop and maintain a healthy mind, body, and spirit. This evening, we're honored and thrilled to have with us Dr. Nicole Green, Executive Director of UCLA's Counseling and Psychological Services, also known as CAPS. She's also the Executive Director of Campus Assault Resources and Education Program, CARE for short. And we also have Tanya Saris, a current fourth-year UCLA student and Executive Director of Active Minds, UCLA. Dr. Green, it's so good to have you with us. Could you share with us a little bit about yourself and your role at UCLA?
Good evening, parents and families. I'm very excited to be with you tonight. As was said, I'm Dr. Nicole Green. I'm the Executive Director of CAPS, which is Counseling and Psychological Services. I began here as a Bruin as an undergrad and graduated and went on to get my degree in counseling psychology. I started my work at UCLA as a therapist here back in 2004 and have been here ever since and have been the executive director of the organization for the past 3 years.
Thank you so much. Tanya, could you share with us a little bit about your background and your role at UCLA?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Tanya Saris. I'm a fourth-year psychology major at UCLA. I am also the executive director of Active Minds UCLA, a student-led organization that aims to raise mental health awareness on campus and the greater Los Angeles community. I'm also a member of the Resilience Peer Network under the Depression Grant Challenge, a member of the Student Wellness Commission, and I have served on a CAP Student Advisory Board before with Dr. Green.
It's so good to have you all together. So Dr. Green, why do you believe it's important for parents and families to understand the mental health challenges faced by our students today?
It's a great question. I think it's really essential for parents and family to understand that mental health has become a huge issue on college campuses across the country, and certainly UCLA is no different. Every year we see increases in students wanting mental health treatment, coming in for mental health care. And I think the question I get often is, why is that? And while we don't know for sure, there are a number of reasons. Some of it has to do with the great work we're doing around stigma reduction with the help of Tanya's group, Active Minds, as well as other students on campus who are really talking about mental health issues and stress, anxiety, depression. I think nationally we're having these conversations about mental health issues. I also think that students are coming in earlier, having already identified mental health issues, either in elementary, middle school, or high school. So they're able to identify that I'm struggling or have struggled in the past and are seeking services early. Definitely, there are more staff and faculty who are aware that students are struggling with mental health issues and are working very hard to identify students and to get them to treatment early. UCLA CAPS does a great deal of education to staff, faculty, and students around signs of distress and how to encourage students to get help. So I think this campus does a great job in saying we're available and that it's okay to talk about the mental health challenges just as you would your physical health challenges. I think that we do a great job of that, and I think that it's reflected in the amount of students that come to seek our services every year.
Oh, that's great to hear. And I think the location of the CAPS office being right at the heart of campus even underscores in its location the accessibility of your services. How about Tanya, from a student perspective, what would you add to this?
I think that what Dr. Green shared was very much spot on. I think that we have definitely improved on working against the mental health stigma on campus, not just at administrative level, but also within organizations. And I think that it's so great that we're doing a webinar geared for parents, especially because, I mean, I think everyone should just understand what mental health is, since we all have mental health. And I think that it's also very important that parents especially know what mental health is, so they're not perpetuating the mental health stigma within their families, but also so that their children and students in general understand that it's okay to ask for help. And I think that it's a huge thing for parents to set an example through that sense. And just to know that students have a social support group back home, because UCLA can get very overwhelming for a lot of students, but it's really nice knowing that at least your parents understand where you're coming from.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. Dr. Green, as a practitioner, what have you seen to be the most common mental health issues that students are encountering today?
Definitely what we see at CAPS, which I don't think is different across the country. We see the majority of students come in saying they are stressed. Stress is a very broad term. I think when you start to get into what's really going on, once you kind of unpack the word stress, the two most predominant things are anxiety and depression. So many students are coming in with real significant anxiety. I think one of the major trends in mental health at UCLA and around the country is the acuity. Students are coming in with a significant amount of distress and stress and anxiety and are really, really struggling to function. Some are having difficulty getting to class. Many students are having difficulty, daily functions, eating, sleeping, or concentrating. They're up all night or they're sleeping all day. Very difficult for them to get to class. And so we're seeing, I think, a couple of things. The major stressors are really the anxiety and depression, although you see fairly acute things as well, such as bipolar disorder, which is phases of depression and then phases of mania or really hyperactivity. We see a good deal of ADHD, attention deficit, hyperactivity disorder, as well as substance abuse issues. But I can't underscore that many students wait until they're feeling suicidal before they come in. So what we're trying to do really through avenues like the webinar, working with student groups, is to try to get these students to identify their needs earlier so that we can get in and help them before they're in real danger.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Dr. Green. You mentioned stress and anxiety, and for this webinar, we had an unprecedented number of questions submitted by parents and family members when they RSVP'd. So Pratibha has a stress-related question. How is stress impacting the mental health of students? And what is the impact of competitiveness on students' mental health? It's a really great questions.
Yes, I would say that stress really is impacting our students. We see around 15% of the student population. We saw 6,700 students this last year. We're a campus of about 44,000. And each year, more and more students present to counseling. I think the question we get most often is it because of the environment or because they're coming in more stressed or because people are reporting it more? And I think the answer is all of the above from all the research that I've seen. I think that because there's less stigma talking about stress, certainly we are seeing students come in more. In addition, we are actually, I think, seeing an increase in rise in the incidence of anxiety and depression. Is it related to the academic environment? Sure. I think that our environment plays a role in terms of being a very competitive, highly impacted institution, and a lot of the pressures related to the quarter system. I'll say that it's a very big transition for a lot of students. And because of some of their own histories, the transition is very, very difficult for students. So I think all things play a factor. I think there's part of it, there's biology, part of it is the environment, and part of it is their students' own individual psychology. So I think all those play a factor. I'll say that one of the big questions that I get quite frequently has to do with this issue of what in the environment is making this happen and how can we change it. And one of the great things in the environment is we're starting to talk about it and think about, different departments or campus are thinking about how can we increase resilience, how can we think about in residential life, encouraging positive coping skills from the day they get onto campus, and talking about these kinds of mental health and wellness issues very early on so that students can understand what do you do to kind of manage in this environment.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Green. Another question raised related to stress is coming from Donna. And Tanya, if you could offer your inputs, how can students handle the stress of low grades, or maybe grades lower than they were used to in high school?
That's an excellent question because I have gone through that similar experience before. Certainly, it will be difficult facing low grades at school, but it's not the end of the world. And I think that's super important to remember that you can improve upon your grades as you can improve with every aspect of life. And it's also, I think, really important to remember there's so many resources at UCLA that can be utilized to further help in case you are struggling with academics or such. And for mental health specific resources, there's always CAPS, and there's also a bunch of other resources on campus that are always eager to help students, especially if they're very much distressed by academics and such.
I want to just add to that. I think that there's a lot that parents can do to help their students set reasonable expectations and really reframe a failure as feedback. It's not the last grade. And can we really learn from the feedback that this isn't quite up to par, as opposed to seeing it as you're a failure? And students tend to then catastrophize and say, I must not deserve to be here. I must be the only one. I must be stupid. And they put these labels on themselves, as opposed to really, I think what they need to hear from each other and from themselves and from parents, that UCLA is a campus for smart people. And hard work is hard for smart people even. And I think they've gotten attached to, if it feels hard, I must not be good at it, as opposed to, because they're used to things feeling easy, and that makes them feel smart, as opposed to you can be smart and it still feel hard. So lessons like that really encourages students to reframe the way they're understanding the feedback, and to reframe this notion that it's either 100% or it's a 0. Like, just because you didn't get an A, does that mean you got an F? So there's lots of ways that students kind of trick themselves into believing that they're not performing, when really they're doing a good job. It's just very hard here.
Yeah, I love the language you use in terms of reframing expectations, and even the way that we communicate to our students, as well as how we communicate to ourselves the messages that we speak. Mindy is one of our viewers, and she has the question, you mentioned, Dr. Green, earlier about stress, anxiety, and depression. And so she says, what resources are available on campus for students dealing with anxiety? So either Dr. Green or Tanya.
Well, I'll talk first about CAPS and just treatment, and then I'd like Tanya to chime in on other resources, because I do think students should take a holistic approach and really take advantage of all the ways that we promote wellness on campus. But I'll start with CAPS. So CAPS really is a short-term treatment model. It's meant to be about 3 sessions for crisis management for most students, and if you have the student health insurance, more treatment as clinically indicated. So if you have the student health insurance, it's about 6 sessions. If your student is coming in knowing I need longer term weekly therapy, there are 2 things I'll say. If they purchase the SHIP insurance, they can be referred. We're really likely to be steps away from one of the most well-known mental health treatment spaces in the country, which is the Semel Institute at UCLA Ronald Reagan Hospital. So they will get long-term, we refer the SHIP students to longer-term treatment in the Department of Psychiatry down in the Ronald Reagan Medical Center. And we also offer, if they as part of your SHIP insurance, you have Anthem insurance. And so a student could go off campus, and if they have the ability to pay a $25 copay, there are many clinicians in the Westwood area that take Anthem insurance, and it would be a $25 copay for students. So for many parents, that might be a worthwhile investment to invest in SHIP insurance, and then they can walk right into Westwood and see a clinician for as long as they're here at UCLA, so that they're getting the adequate treatment that they need. If they don't have the student health insurance and you have a significant mental health issue, the things I would consider are, many parents opt out of this insurance not knowing that the student might develop an issue. If they have other insurance and it's good, then what CAPS will do is help you connect to that. If the insurance looks like it's not going to help, like they have maybe treatment that's too far away, or the nearest doctor isn't close, like Kaiser is 2 buses away, 8 miles. So it's very challenging for students to get there. They might consider purchasing the SHIP insurance as well. But if they can't, certainly CAPS does what it can to connect them to their insurance provider.
Yeah, I would definitely go to CAPS first. Like, that's just the primary source, I would say. But then there are other resources on campus that are less known about. For example, we have the GRIP peer coaching program, where students are able to support one another in weekly meetings, and they can just go over and talk about anything that the student might want to talk about, anxiety being one of the subjects. There's also the Resilience Peer Network at UCLA. This is under the Depression Grand Challenge, and basically what it is basically empirically validated internet cognitive behavioral therapy for students, and they'll be able to opt in or opt out of the peer support group. So basically, that program specifically aims to moderate levels of anxiety and depression. So I would say that's another really good resource on campus. And aside from that, I would say the office hours around campus at the LGBT Center, the Bruin Resource Center. I don't know if I'm forgetting any.
Also, what I always encourage for students, we have something called the Mind Body Balance for Busy Bruins, which is a curriculum for students to it's a 5-week curriculum where they can learn sleep, they can learn about nutrition, they can learn about mindfulness and meditation in a curriculum. So it's sort of like a class they would take. And it's offered through recreation, through CAPS, and through the Office for Campus and Student Resilience. And that's a big one. Also recreation, I think yoga and exercise and nutrition and learning about so many issues for all of us, adults and younger adults, is about really managing and regulating our body. What I often say to students, they end up feeling really stressed and can't concentrate, but they haven't slept for 4 weeks. They're using a lot of caffeine drinks and coffee to manage. And I don't want to take anybody's coffee. I don't want anybody to take my coffee. But I do think helping them to understand how important it is to regulate their body, because then they'll start to feel anxious. They'll start to feel like they can't concentrate, their memory's impacted, and then they feel stupid. And so they get themselves in a very bad cycle. So even just through recreation and sleep and getting proper nutrition, they start to regulate their bodies. And that is one big thing that really can help their mental health.
And to add along to that, I think that it's also important to mention that there's so many student groups on campus that also aim to educate students about what anxiety is. I mean, how can you treat anxiety when you don't even know what it is or how it looks like? So I think that it's worth looking into student groups and getting involved to see what other resources might be provided, if not here at UCLA, then the greater Los Angeles community. So looking into student groups like Active Minds UCLA or NAMI or the Mental Health Initiative and other resources given by the Student Wellness Commission, I would also look into as a student.
I see that there's a question related to handling things that are more typical, like grief or loss or relationship, not just mental health disorders. How do we help our students cope with some of the more developmental issues? Grief is not necessarily a mental health disorder. It's definitely a part of life, as a relationship concerns, illness, or just adjusting to graduating as much as adjusting to coming into campus. And I think that that's where that's where a lot of these other resources, peer counselors can really help, talking to RAs and RDs, really advocating for themselves in terms of, I know it's the middle of the quarter, what can you do to find space on campus to connect to other folks, to connect to people, as well as using CAPS resources. But one of the things about CAPS, it's impacted as well, and we tend to do more of a triage, like what's most urgent, who's suicidal, any risk. So students who are kind of grieving, which is more developmental, tend to have to wait longer than they really want to. So I really encourage them to reach out to things like Active Minds, to the GRIT coaching program, to their RAs and RDs, to their family, to their friends, because these are kinds of issues that can get real support just having people to talk to. And that's in their community, that's around, and certainly that's also CAPS. We also have a 24-hour crisis line. So students can call anytime, day or night, and talk to a clinician. And if they're struggling with a grief or a loss or a job issue, maybe it's not that I need ongoing weekly therapy. I just need to talk to someone while I'm in crisis, while I'm thinking about my loved one. So there are lots of things that we hope that students can do to just reach out urgently when they're having those kinds of concerns.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So let me go ahead and express Susan's question, because there's another viewer that's also resonating with her. And maybe Tanya, you could offer some perspective from Active Minds and how students can also support each other. How do you handle when a student is grieving from a loss of a death or a relationship, illness, job? So there's really kind of a plethora of possible losses. And Susan mentions that students complain that they get no relief to handle emotional losses or bereavement leave either. So sometimes they feel like they just have to hold it to themselves. Where can they find support?
Well, we just mentioned a variety of different resources which could be utilized towards that. But I think that first most just being open, if they're comfortable about talking about their loss, and just seeking peer support is really important. Like within Active Minds, sometimes we have been approached by students who are going through loss, and really it's just about talking and just validating their experiences and empathetic listening and such. That really just seems to help students. If not like entirely, but I think that it is a step towards helping. I don't know if you would like to add anything.
Yeah, I think that there are, as we said, a number of cases. I think the one thing I didn't mention is that we do have a grief support group at CAPS, and we also have drop-in groups for CAPS that talk about stress management and mindfulness. And that once you have a brief screening, you can just enroll in our group for 5 sessions and get support. And you can also get a referral to our grief group. That's just another resource to add.
Okay, thank you. So a follow-up question that Susan raises as well is, what about situations where teachers don't seem to care that someone lost someone physically? So maybe it's possible that a student encountered a lack of understanding or even maybe compassion from a professor or maybe staff member. What would you suggest in those situations?
Yeah, I mean, that's really an unfortunate situation. I don't hear that happening that often, but I'm sure that it does. The things I would say for the parent to encourage the student to do, often our Dean of Students office or Dean for Students office has case managers that can, if a student is in distress and there's a student of concern, if you call the Dean for Students office and help get them assigned to a case manager, the case manager might be able to advocate on that student's behalf with the professor. So don't be afraid to reach out and advocate for your student with the Dean for Students office, so that if there is a particularly challenging situation, the professor maybe didn't understand, or I don't know what the issue is, you have an advocate there, and it's not just the student feeling vulnerable with their grade, trying to challenge a professor. We would want to get another support person in there, and I think the right referral would be to case management services, and you can Google that on studentsofconcern.ucla.edu.
Okay, thank you. So a couple weeks ago was homecoming for UCLA. And yet during the first quarters, especially for first year or transfer students, it could be a time of homesickness, trying to settle in, but feeling a little unsettled. And so Diana, Courtney, Claudia, and Ed all submitted questions beforehand and said, how can students best deal with homesickness? And are there some resources available to our students?
Yeah, homesickness is always a really big challenge. So I think there's a few prong, approach. Number one, I think that it's really important to validate the student's homesickness. And I think one of the things we do is, oh, it's going to go away or it'll get better. And really, as opposed to just listening, what are the concerns? What are you exactly concerned about? And really listening to the student and what their specific concerns are. I think encouraging the student to reach out to CAPS, but if they're not ready to go to CAPS, then certainly their RAs are really well trained if they're living in the residences to address homesickness and to talk to students and can get them connected. Are they feeling like they don't fit in at the dorm? Are we encouraging them to go to different events, or who are they eating next to? And do they have someone? Do they have a plan for the day? I think students feel a little lost. Where should I be? And I think they also have these expectations that it should be easier or more fun than it is. And so setting reasonable expectations. Not everybody hits the ground running. Some people are slow to warm up. Some people, they don't have a natural fit with their roommates, and so they see other folks getting along so well, and they do a lot of self-comparison. They are doing a lot of self-comparison, especially on social media these days. I encourage them to take social media breaks so they don't feel like they're not doing as well as other people. It's easy to get into that comparison mode. But the most important resource I would just say is reach out, use the crisis line, come into CAPS, and so we can at least evaluate what's going on and figure out like what's a strategy for you in the meantime, if you might have to wait a week or two for an appointment.
And to just add a little bit to that, you did mention the transfer population, and we have an excellent transfer center here at UCLA.
Good point.
We have just the most amazing people looking out for transfer students, and they provide all of these events and resources and just a sense of community. And I think that's super important, especially if a student is going through homesickness, to just find people that are like them, who might be going through the same thing, and just build a sense of community that way. And as always, just looking out to different organizations and talking to people and just seeing that they're not alone in that endeavor, and that a lot more students might be experiencing homesickness. So yeah.
Yeah, I love the fact that UCLA has so many resources available, and CAPS is so well endowed with men and women that are available to support our students. But Barry raises a good question. He says, is there anything at all that parents can do about their students who tend to isolate themselves rather than seek assistance for issues, whether it's academic or mental health related? And I think for some people who maybe do a little self-diagnosis or are reluctant to seek help, or maybe feel like it's stigmatic, they might just tend to stay on their own. What do you recommend to parents in this situation?
Yeah, this is always a challenge, because you've reached this period with your student where you can't sort of force them to do stuff. You're not near them, and there's a certain amount of autonomy. What I always encourage students to do is continue to ask questions, continue to follow up, continue to listen to their concerns. Don't push, but certainly kind of encourage them to talk to you more and set reasonable expectations for yourself. It may take them 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks, even a quarter or 2 quarters to come in for help. Certainly, if you're starting to see more distress and they're starting to look less and less like the person you know them to be, I encourage you to call CAPS for your own consultation. What can I do? Because it might be that we can get an RA to knock on their door, or try different interventions that are more specific to your child. But you know your child best. And if they're starting to look less and less like who they are, and they're more and more symptoms of isolation, they're getting more and more depressed and more isolated, I encourage you to call CAP so we can figure out directly what to do to work together, because we don't want to be in a position of forcing them, but we want to acknowledge that this is not turning around.
Okay, thank you. Tanya, we know that a lot of our emotional well-being is tied into our relational well-being. And so a couple of our viewers have questions related to our social life. Rose says, how do you help our students navigate the social aspects of college? And Valerie is indicating that her student is having a hard time making friends or is feeling isolated. How do you help them handle their sadness in these situations?
That's a good question. And it's also a difficult one because it can be very difficult making friends at UCLA, especially if you're a first year. I would say just trying to immerse yourself in different communities and organizations is always a really good thing to try. You never know who you're going to meet. You never know like who is going to be your best friend like down the line. I think that just trying to be open and trying to actively make friends and just being open to challenges as such is really important. But I do understand that it can be difficult, especially when you're discouraged or sad, when things may not go down so well. But I would say just being persistent and just trying to move forward and just try to see how they can make the best of it. Would you add anything, Dr. Green?
No, I think, this is one of the things that it's such a large institution, it can feel very overwhelming, and it may not, click the first quarter or so. And I do think that sometimes it takes students trying a few times and they get a little bit more frustrated. But I guess my answer would be to continue to reach out, continue to try. If you're interested in different clubs or organizations, encouraging them to set weekly goals, to talk to a new person in class or sit next to a new person in the dining hall, or to one of the ways that our students tend to get involved or create community because it's so large is really around the issue of service. And we have a very highly high service culture at UCLA. People are always involved in different organizations and wanting to help other people. So finding a place where they can be of service is going to make them feel more connected, because many of the students want to feel of service. And there are lots of organizations, Volunteer Day or Dance Marathon to support HIV/AIDS research, even just those kinds of things, going to different meetings, I think is going to make them start to feel part of a larger goal.
All right, thank you for sharing those encouraging words. So you've mentioned, both of you have mentioned the UCLA Grand Challenge. And if you could share a little bit about that. And then also there's a question that just came in from Deborah. And she says, can the students with depression access the UCLA Grand Challenge for treatment, or is that just a separate research endeavor?
Do you want me to talk?
I can start.
Go ahead.
Sure. So to my understanding, the Depression Grand Challenge is a campus-wide initiative to eliminate the burden of depression by the year 2050. And so basically what they're trying to do is trying to find the underlying mechanisms behind depression and see how they can improve mental health treatment. So I mentioned the Resilience Peer Network before briefly. That is a study under the Depression Grand Challenge, and incoming students specifically, are able to access that treatment. They would just need to sign up and be briefly screened and seen if they can participate in this treatment.
Yeah, so just to say a little bit about what that is, the Depression Grand Challenge can serve students and does serve students, I should say, first and foremost. So you should definitely go on the website and look up the UCLA Depression Grand Challenge, and students can take a survey. Once they've taken a survey and they're screened for depression, some are offered an internet-based cognitive behavioral therapy. Just really quickly, it's an 8-week something that they can do on the computer to eliminate depression. And resilience peers who are students will meet with them weekly to make sure that they're doing the curriculum online to get better compliance with the recommendations that are online for them. If the students, but you have to have sort of mild depression to go through that. If your student has moderate to severe depression, they also have an innovative treatment network that they're working on that is a research study down through the UCLA Department of Psychiatry. Students can enroll in the research study and get a lot of treatment through the Depression Grand Challenge for, as I understand it, up to a year of psychiatry, medication management, and or therapy. So it depends on how they screen and what happens, but they're offered a couple of research protocols. And many students have taken the screening. Many have screened positive for depression. Many have enrolled in the internet-based treatment, and students are starting to enroll in the actual face-to-face treatment as well.
Okay, thank you. So Pratibha submitted a question, and this is very helpful for parents and family members. How do we find out the beginning signs of stress and psychological distress?
Sure. So, this is a question that comes up quite often. How do I know if my child is sort of in the normal range of stress, or is it now something that they need to seek treatment for? I'll say that, first of all, you start with, your child and their baseline, how they're doing when they're doing well. And so the three things I'll say is the more symptoms they have that are not normal for them, if they're sleeping more than usual, if they're not eating as much, if they're reporting to you they're sad or depressed or anxious or panicked, if they're seeming out of sorts, if they're not able to concentrate, if they're not going to class. So the amount of signs really is more of a signal to me, and then how intense it is for them. How bad does it feel? So it's a certain amount of their normal baseline, and then are they way off that for more than a week or two? At that point, it would start to raise flags with me. I mean, you hopefully have a history with your child, and so you have a sense of their ebbs and flows. If this is feeling abnormal or really longer or more intense than usual, I would start to ask them some more questions and really encourage them to, at the very least, just go. And CAPS is open 8 to 7, Monday through Thursday, 8 to 5 on Fridays. And we do a brief screen or triage, very quick appointment just to see what does the student need. And at the very least, they'll get a brief screen and it'll seem like, well, maybe our recommendation is to go to the ICBT, or maybe our recommendation is an urgent appointment today. But really what the parents and family are looking for is, how's my student normally doing? And then if this is lasting more than 2-3 weeks past the period of just midterms, and how different is it and how intense does it feel, are really some of the things that I'm concerned about.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, Kevin also had a similar question. Just wondering about what the signs are that a student may not be adjusting well, and I think those are very good recommendations. So you mentioned about the triaging process at CAPS. And so Jennifer's wondering, if a student needs counseling, how quickly can he or she be seen? So they're feeling something and they walk into the building just across from the intramural fields. And could you walk us through that process, what that would look like?
Sure. So we're a staff of about 75. We have about 25 clinicians. We have of the equivalent of about 6 psychiatrists. And then we've got about 6 staff who are just there to screen the students and see from a triage standpoint who needs treatment. So what will happen if a student walks in during our triage hours, we call them brief screening hours, a student will meet with a clinician that day, usually within the hour, and the brief screen will ask them what's going on, talk a little bit about their issue, find out how severe it is, and based on that, CAPS has some slots available for students who need to be seen that day, who are very, very urgent or emergent. Then we hold a certain amount of slots for students who are urgent, meaning You can't wait more than a week or two. And then we have more of our routine appointments, which sometimes during peaks of the quarter can be 3 or 4 weeks out to wait for an appointment. So what will happen is the student will, in the meantime, be offered the group treatment I was talking about called Coping Through the Quarter. So your individual intake might be 4 or 5 weeks away, but you can start coping through the quarter the next day if you want to. It's offered every week on a rolling basis, and it covers issues of stress management, mindfulness, time management, managing your mood, managing perfectionism are the 5 sessions, and that runs all the time. So for a student, if they're coming into CAPS and meeting with someone, it really depends on the issue, how soon you would get seen. And once you are given an appointment, then you start meeting with that therapist regularly. If you need medication, then that therapist would refer you to a psychiatry appointment, depending on the urgency as well. And at that point, you're with your therapist and your psychiatrist until it's determined you want to, transition to an Anthem referral into the community, or to VHS, or to your private insurance provider. But you would at least get those initial few sessions to figure out what's going on and what do you need, and a good treatment plan.
Okay, thank you. So Leanna is also wondering about the background, maybe the experience of the CAPS counselor, education, and then she also asked about walk-in appointments, and you mentioned how there's different tiers of appointments available. And also she wonders, is there a fee associated with this for the students?
Yes, all good questions. So all UCLA registered students are eligible for some part of the service. If you don't have the SHIP insurance, it's up to about 3 sessions and urgent psychiatry visits and case management to help you get connected to longer term treatment. If you have the SHIP insurance, again, you're already prepaid, so there's no additional fee for the service unless you miss a session, and it's $20 for any missed, late canceled or no-show appointment. But all the services are prepaid with SHIP, all of the psychiatry services, as well as the therapy services and group services. If you do not have SHIP, you're still eligible for some groups, and that's $15 a session. And psychiatry is really limited in terms of the service because we do such limited treatment that we really only see non-SHIP students for urgent psychiatry visits. And those can be expensive. Those are about $150 for an intake and $75 for a follow-up. In terms of the level of experience, we have licensed marriage and family therapists who do our triage. The people who provide therapy are psychologists who have a PhD in psychology, or they're psychologists in training. We have about 10 trainees, including a couple of students in their doctoral program, and about 3 folks who completed their doctorate who are doing their postdoc hours. And we have, as I said, the equivalent of 6 psychiatrists. So they're MD doctors who do medication management. So our staff is LMFTs. We have our LCSWs do our case management and our clinical coordination for students who need to have a higher level of care, or who need to be hospitalized, things like that.
Okay, thank you. So Tanya, you're the point person for Active Minds at UCLA. Could you tell us a little bit about how it acts as a support and advocacy group for students at UCLA, and how students can also get involved with Active Minds?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as I mentioned briefly before, Active Minds is a student-led organization under the Student Wellness Commission that basically works on mental health advocacy and eradicating the mental health stigma. We have 4 primary committees, which are events, education, workshops, and advocacy. And basically through these very specific committees, we put on workshops and events and educational presentations on various subjects relating to mental health. So on top of that, we also have general meetings where we go over what mental health is, how we can eradicate the mental health stigma, what it means to be a peer support group or something. There's so many different things that we talk about, and really what we try to do is educate students and also give them the opportunity to work towards this advocacy. So students are able to get involved in the development of these programs, but we also offer outside volunteer opportunities. For example, right now we're working on a collaboration with the Resnick Neuropsychiatric Hospital to do a donation drive. We also try to be very active with outside collaborations, such as the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. We just did a walk with them in Santa Monica. So there's a lot that we try to do. There's a lot of work to be done. And I would encourage all students to apply. We have our website, which is activemindsucla.com, and you can find the application through there. Or you can also go to swc.ucla.edu and find our committee under their page, and the application link should be there too.
Okay, could you go ahead and repeat those websites again?
Sure, yeah. Our website is activemindsucla.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Active Minds UCLA, or Instagram, or Snapchat. We have a lot of social media platforms. And you can also find the application on swc.ucla.edu.
Dr. Green, do you have some thoughts?
I didn't hear what you asked. You were muted.
I'm so sorry. Sorry about that. So we know a big part of our emotional well-being are the healthy habits that we practice. And so what would you say are some healthy habits parents and family members can encourage their students to engage in to help promote a healthy mind, body, and spirit? Thank you.
Yes. One of my favorite things to talk about, I talked a little bit about it initially with just making sure students are eating, sometimes it's stressed to say 3 meals a day, but maybe 2 meals a day, to be getting 6 to 8 hours of sleep every night if they can, to not take long naps in the middle of the day, try to keep a regular sleep schedule. The quarter system goes very quickly. And so if they get dysregulated in week 3, week 4, week 5, it's very difficult to catch up by week 10. The other thing I'll say is if they're having a lot of perfectionism or fear of failure, to remember that it's just feedback. I often say, fail is first attempt in learning, that they're going to get better over time. If they're having lots of thoughts of self-criticism, I encourage students to engage in self-compassion and to reward all small steps as they're trying to get better, and not expect them to really kind of breeze in and be able to navigate such a complicated system so quickly. If they're doing a lot of self-comparison, I really encourage them to kind of stay in their own lane, set their own goals, not try to do what everybody else is doing, find out really who they are and what works best for them. I also encourage a lot of mindfulness. Often my students are either way in the past, the last test they took, how bad they did, or way in the future because I didn't pass my first test, my first quarter, I'm never going to get into med school, way out far, as opposed to just being in the moment, trying to understand it's November 2017. There's a long way to go even this year. And they tend to miss the moment because they're so focused on next quarter or the next quarter or the next year. So trying to get more present, regulating their body, doing a lot of positive self-talk and not limiting the self-comparison, encouraging self-compassion, and every time they can do something different, even one step better is a step better. So all of those things really, I think, contribute to a more resilient mindset. And what we're trying to do is encourage students, rather than one bad thing happens, they feel like they can't get back up. How do I bounce back? How do I encourage myself? How do I do that positive self-talk to kind of get back up, or look at the feedback, or go to an office hour and not feel so much shame or self-criticism? So those are the things that I really encourage.
So Dr. Green, you mentioned mindfulness, and Anu Pama, one of our viewers, raised a question: do we have sessions available to students to encourage mindfulness or meditation?
Oh, you want to talk about the student resilience? I can talk about it through CAPS. We have short groups for mindfulness at CAPS. We have longer term, which is like a full quarter group on mindfulness. We have a 3-session group, or 8-session group. We also have drop-in mindfulness hours through the MARC, which is the Mindfulness Awareness Research Center at UCLA. There are podcasts on their website that they're offered through the Semel Institute as well. Also through recreation, they have mindfulness classes, as well as through the Office for Campus and Student Resilience. They have a mindfulness program that they're growing that offers mindfulness all over campus as well. So UCLA is very interested and invested in mindfulness and meditation as a practice. In addition to that, we have something called the Healthy Campus Initiative. It's the chancellor's goal to make UCLA the healthiest campus across the country. And we have different groups that we're working on different things, and we're in the Mindwell Pod, and they do a lot of things around mindfulness as well. So if students can go on the MARC website or even the CAPS website, generally there's lots of different offerings for mindfulness, at least a beginning introductory workshop on it.
Okay, thank you. So Veronica is asking if a student is overwhelmed with new environment, new college life, roommates, not being close to family, and courses that maybe are tougher than they're accustomed to, what do you recommend to help them to calm down and not to be overstressed?
Maybe I'll start with Tanya and then I'll jump in. Do you know?
Sure. I would say, first most, mindfulness. I think that it's super important to just be aware of the present and not be stuck in the past or in the future, because that can definitely manifest itself into like anxiety and depression. I know that I often try to think about the present and try to focus on what's at hand, because that's what I have control over at the moment. And that brings me some sense of comfort and relief. I think, again, just like talking to people, talking to RAs, talking to people who are giving out all of these resources on campus is super important. And it really helps out with the feeling of being overwhelmed. Often it can feel like there's just so much going on, and it really also helps to just like plan things out and just see like throughout your day, like what you can do. Even just like scheduling like I don't know, like lunch or something is like super important, but it can actually help out. And just doing all of these exercises really helps out with the feeling of being overwhelmed, I would say.
And I just want to echo that. I think a couple things. I think some of it is not just that they're feeling overwhelmed, but they feel bad they feel overwhelmed. So they feel a feeling and then they feel bad they feel the feeling. So the first thing is to eliminate the judgment that they're experiencing homesickness or overwhelm and feeling overwhelmed by their classes, which a lot of students do. The second thing, I think I echo Tanya's recommendation to break things into smaller parts. Sometimes it's establishing a basic routine, and that's hard to do, but really trying to just the groundedness of feeling like I'm in a routine is really important. And then not trying to address it all at once. So let me get my classes under control, make sure I'm going to TA office hours, make sure I'm getting a good study schedule and finding out where I actually study best and who I study best with, number one. And then as you're working on trying to develop a social life, not necessarily it has to be everything all day, every day. So maybe I'll work on my academics during the week, and then I'll pick one thing to do on the weekend. So setting very reasonable, achievable goals. And I think a lot of times students make goals that are kind of like wishes, like I just hope this happens, as opposed to, here's my goal. This week I'm going to go to one TA's office hour. This week I'm going to go to one event. It doesn't have to be everything. So setting achievable goals, really not feeling bad that they feel their feelings, reaching out for support, and setting a reasonable routine is also helpful.
Okay, thank you. So we have time for a few more questions, and these relate to very critical moments. So if a student is in crisis, what are the best resources available to them? How can someone from their support system make sure that they get the assistance they need? And specifically, Marcy, family member is asking, is it possible to have wellness checks done for at-risk students by a medical professional? Or are the campus police involved or available in situations like this?
Sure. Students in crisis is a big issue on campus. So I believe I'll start with the second part of the question, which is about the welfare checks. If you're concerned about your student and you feel like you need someone to go check on them, knock on their door, UCPD does that all of the time. If you don't want it to be so scary as the police, also if they're living on campus, our A's and our dues will go and knock on a student's door and see how you're doing. What's the best way to kind of get, once they've engaged the student, then what? The best thing is, if you really are concerned and you can get someone to come out, the best things to do are, the best referral is to offer to walk them down to counseling and psychological services right then and there. And just say, you know, now is when I think we should go. If they won't go then and there, I have class, I don't want to, they have an excuse or a different priority, when are you gonna go? Let's set a time, let's set a date, let's look at your calendar, let's look at when they're open, so that you nail down with the student, when are they gonna commit to going? And the third, which is, you know, you can't get them to commit to going, but you can at least continue to follow up and ask them questions. And again, this is where where parents can call CAPS, they can call the dean for students and say, I'm concerned about my student. They have a history of suicidal ideation, they have a history of depression, they have a history of substance abuse. I really want a more proactive plan to try to get them into counseling. And dean for students, CAPS, and you as the parent can work together as a team to figure out how best to get them in. So I would really encourage the parent to reach out and say, I'm concerned, where do I need to go next, and who do I need to call?
Could you give us the phone number for CAPS, Dr. Green?
Sure, the phone number is a 24-hour crisis line. It's 310-825-0768, 310-825-0768. And our website is www.counseling.ucla.edu. So either one of those will give you much more information about our services, how to access us, when to access us. I will also encourage you to go to the Students of Concern.ucla.edu website, and you can just Google UCLA Students of Concern, and our website will come up. And that really connects you with the Dean of Students.
Those are so easy to remember. Counseling.ucla.edu and studentsofconcern.ucla.edu. Wonderful. Related to this also is, what do you do after a roommate dies, or what do you do after a friend commits suicide? And Cecilia raises that question. How can we provide support or find support in these situations?
I'm going to do a really simple answer. They need to reach out. Death by suicide is one of the most tragic things that can happen, and the ripple effects in the community are vast and far and wide and deep. So we really want to encourage a student to reach out. We want to encourage the parent to reach out to the student, continue to check on them, understanding that there will be a certain period of shock, which may last a few weeks, so they may not be ready to talk about it just then and there, but they should look at there will be stages of grief. And once they've kind of gotten over the shock, they really, really need to be mindful of reaching out. And so give them a week or so, check on them, give them another week and check on them. I would say reach out, reach out, reach out.
Yeah, I would agree with Dr. Green, as well as just letting their friends know, just making sure that the community is checking in on them as well. It's really important for parents to sometimes check in with their friends to see if their friends are checking up on them. I think that's a really good tactic to use. And also, I just want to mention that if a student does die on campus due to suicide, often we hold healing spaces. These are put on by student organizations, so we usually do this for students who might be in shock or who might be dealing with grief, and usually we have mental health professionals there too.
And if CAPS is aware that a roommate is impacted by a death by suicide, we always call that roommate. We always call who was in the classes. CAPS goes to the classes that that student was in, and when they make the announcement, we're there available to talk to students right then and there.
Okay, those are good words to know. So if you could provide for us and for our viewers one final takeaway. I mean, there's so much more that we can do, and we have so many good questions that have been submitted, and the ones that we weren't able to respond to, the Parent and Family Programs Office will definitely respond to each and every one of them. But if there's one big takeaway that we could leave with, what would that be? And we'll start with you, Tanya, and then we'll give Dr. Green our last word.
Sure. I think it's just very important to remember that you just never know what someone might be going through. Sometimes it's not super visible when someone is in distress. So it's really important to just always check up, especially on your child or a student. And also just to never assume that you know entirely what your child might need. It's also really important to ask them what they need. That's what I would say.
That's a good point. I think the big two gate takeaways: check in on your child, encourage them to get service. Even if there's a long wait, doesn't matter, just tell them you're going to wait regardless. If you never go, then you'll be waiting longer than that. The second thing I'll just say is, to Tanya's point, it may take a while for a student to engage, but that doesn't mean you stop asking them, and you say to them, is it okay if I check in on you in a week or 2 weeks? And they may say, oh, so mom, dad, whoever, you're kind of annoying me. And you say, well, I know, but I love you, and I want to make sure you're doing okay. And if you check in, reach out, not in a punitive way, but in a I care about you way.
Well, Dr. Green, Tanya, thank you so much for being with us tonight and for being a part of our conversation with our viewers about such an important topic for UCLA. We all want our students to have good emotional and mental health, and it's good to know of all the resources available at UCLA for both Active Minds as well as the counseling and psychological services. And one of the things that we love about UCLA is the whole theme of optimism. And we hear from so many parents that when they see their students on campus, there really is a spirit of optimism and happiness and confidence. And yet we also know the reality that sometimes there are valleys and there are struggles, and we feel a lot of pressures to succeed and just make it through life. And so it's good to know that there is so much available to our students as well as to our families, and remembering to be proactive and to avail ourselves of these great resources. We want to thank you, our viewers, for joining us tonight. Thank you so much for carving out time to be a part of our discussion, for the questions that you've submitted, and for the care that you have for UCLA and for our students. And we know that it's because of you, our parents, that UCLA is such a vital institution, not only for our students, but really for all of us as families. The recorded version of our webinar will be available in just a little bit later this evening. And we'd like to invite you to join us for our next virtual discussion, which is titled Communicating with Your Student During Winter Break. And that's going to take place on Wednesday, December 13th at 5 p.m. And so we'd love for you to join us then. Have a wonderful evening, and go Bruins. Good night.